Sorry we left you with our mess of a planet. Sorry that we were too caught up in our own doings to do something. Sorry we listened to people who made excuses to do nothing. I hope you forgive us. We just didn't realize how special the earth was. Like a marriage gone wrong, we didn't know what we had until it was gone. For example, I'm guessing you probably know it as the Amazon desert, right? Well, believe it or not, it was once called the Amazon rainforest, and there were billions of trees there, all of them gorgeous. And oh, you don't know much about trees, do you? Well, let me tell you, trees are amazing. I mean, we literally breathe the air they are creating. They clean up our pollution, our carbon. They store and purify water, give us medicine that cures our diseases, food that feeds us, which is why I'm so sorry to tell you that we burn them down. Cut them down with brutal machines, horrific, at a rate of 40 football fields every minute. That's 50% of all the trees in the world gone in the last 100 years. Why? For this. And that wouldn't make me so sad if it weren't so many pictures of leaves on it. You know, when I was a child, I read how the Native Americans had such consideration for the planet that they felt responsible for how they left the land for the next 7 generations. Which brings me great sorrow, because most of us today don't even care about tomorrow. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we put profit above people, greed above need, the rule of gold above the golden rule. I'm sorry we use nature as a credit card with no spending limit, overdrafting animals to extinction, stealing your chance to ever see their uniqueness or become friends with them. Sorry we poison the ocean so much that you can't even swim in them. But most of all, I'm sorry about our mindset, 'cause we had the nerve to call this destruction progress. Hey Fox News, if you don't think climate change is a threat, I dare you to interview the thousands of homeless people in Bangladesh. See, while you were in your penthouse nestled, their homes were literally washed away beneath their feet due to rising sea levels. And Sarah Palin, you said that you love the smell of fossil fuels. Well, I urge you to talk to the kids of Beijing who are forced to wear pollution masks just to go to school. See, you can ignore this, but the thing about truth is, it can be denied, not avoided. So I'm sorry, future generations. I'm sorry that our footprint became a sinkhole and not a garden. I'm sorry that we paid so much attention to ISIS and very little to how fast the ice is melting in the Arctic. I'm sorry we doomed you, and I'm sorry we couldn't find another planet in time to move to. You know what? Cut the beat. I'm not sorry. This future, I do not accept it. Because an error does not become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We can redirect this. How? Let me suggest that if a farmer sees a tree that is unhealthy, they don't look at the branches to diagnose it, they look at the root. So like that farmer, we must look at the root, and not to the branches of government, not to the politicians run by corporations. We are the root, we are the foundation, this generation. It is up to us to take care of this planet. It is our only home. We must globally warm our hearts and change the climate of our souls and realize that we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature. And to betray nature is to betray us. To save nature is to save us. Because whatever you're fighting for, racism or poverty, feminism, gay rights, or any type of equality, it won't matter in the least. Because if we don't all work together to save the environment, we will be equally extinct. Sorry.
Well, there are thousands of videos just like that all over YouTube. And they all speak of the imminent disaster of climate change. And a lot of people under the age of 40 have been greatly impacted. Many of them have little or no hope. And this is because they have been brought up under the belief that humans are in charge of the future of the planet. That whether or not there is an earth in the future depends on us. And they have been taught from their earliest of years that if we are to save the planet, we must change our behavior significantly. They're being told from the earliest of ages, from the earliest of years, that irreversible damage has been already done that will take hundreds to thousands of years to overcome. And they are being told that further delay will only increase the magnitude of the catastrophic catastrophe to come. Tonight we're going to be talking about climate change and whether or not this is the end. I want to welcome you here to Cornerstone tonight. We have guests among us. Thank you for coming out and being with us. We certainly appreciate your presence. This issue of climate change is one that is impacting the world as a whole. And again, when we think of those under 40, it has been significant. One report by CNN that aired last October revealed that climate change related events and distress are linked to greater risks of anxiety, depression, strained relationships, and even suicide. It is impacting the way that young people make decisions about their career and their relationships. The voices are everywhere. This report says that the consequences of extreme weather and climate anxiety affect decision-making, impaired cognition, and lower levels of self-control. One person interviewed in this report said they're worried about it because they know it's going to affect their future. How do you plan for the future when you don't know what the future will look like? And so adolescents are susceptible to mental health effects like trauma and anxiety from climate change and related natural disasters. But they can also be indirectly affected from weather events and heat and pollution. These things disrupt a child's life. Their classes might be canceled, their homes might be damaged, or they might experience food insecurity. So I found this interview out on the internet, and then it led me to another rabbit hole that I jumped down in. Some people now, because of climate change, are questioning whether they need to have children or not. It is being said that bringing new life onto the planet is morally questionable due to unavoidable suffering and harm that comes with existing. And so therefore, our young people are being told that a child-free lifestyle is seen as the responsible and compassionate choice. The idea is that more population equals more pollution. Now, if you think I've really gone off the rails here with this and found some backwater study of a bunch of conservative Republicans, let me share with you a study from 2009. This is about Oregon State. And the premise of their study was a person is responsible for the carbon emissions of their descendants. So, according to this study, parents are responsible for half of their children's carbon emissions. And grandparents, you're not off the hook either. You are responsible for 1/4 of each of your grandchildren's carbon emissions. This is the study that invented the phrase carbon legacy. And in the study, they found that each child over the course of their lifetime will emit 9,441 tons of carbon dioxide. So, the more children that a person has, the more that person contributes to global warming. And so, in 2019, a prominent New York United States representative said, quote, basically, there's a scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult And it does lead young people to have a very legitimate question. Is it still okay to have children? I got to looking around on CNBC and found a recent interview with a person, a 39-year-old English teacher who told the interviewer that they had had a major depressive episode based on the existential angst over the world their children would be growing up in. She says, "I refuse to bring children into the burning hellscape that we call a planet." And she goes on to say, "I'm constantly thinking about when it is going to be appropriate to dissuade them from having children of their own, as I think we are really past the point of no return." So, I could go on for another 30 minutes with these kinds of examples. This is really part of the cultural reality right now. And for those of us who are older in the second half of our lives, we need not dismiss it. The anxiety and the concern that the younger generations are feeling is real, and we need to acknowledge that. But I think it is also our challenge to help them see things from a biblical perspective. And that's our challenge, and that's the aim that we want to go with this tonight. 3,000 years ago, Solomon said this: "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun." Can anyone say about anything, "Look, this is new"? It has already existed in the ages before us. And so there has always been those in our world who have tried to whip the entire culture into a frenzy about the coming destruction of the world. Maybe you've forgotten about this, but 110 years ago, there was a panic around the coming of Halley's Comet. It was said that the comet, when it came, that it was made of poisonous gas, and its toxic fumes would cause widespread death. And what happened is people decided to stuff towels under their doors and covered the keyholes in their doors with paper. Obviously, we all survived. In the 1950s, we were afraid of an extraterrestrial invasion. And it was said in 1954 that aliens from the planet Clarion had beamed down messages that a flood would destroy the planet. And so people quit their jobs and sold their homes in anticipation of the end. In the 1960s, we had the threat of a nuclear holocaust. I guess my video is not going to play. This is a TV commercial. There it goes. A TV commercial from the 1950s about duck and cover. And it's got a cute little jingle. I'm not going to play it for you tonight in the lesson, but you can look this up on YouTube. But some of you remember duck and cover? From the late 50s, early 60s, when you were back in elementary school and everybody was building bomb shelters and people were being told that they needed to get ready at a moment's notice to drop to the ground and cover themselves in case the atomic bomb went off. We all remember this, and we can kind of look back and kind of laugh at this now because this was the world as it was 70 years ago. And, of course, as we fast forward to the 1970s, especially the early 1970s, the great concern was global cooling. These are copies of actual news accounts from the Washington Post and the New York Times in 1970, 71, and 72. And it was believed that the Earth's temps had cooled several degrees over the first half of the 20th century. And so here you have it in the early 70s, these newspapers being filled with dire warnings that the end was coming. And so what's been going on since the early 2000s? Well, now it's global warming. And so tonight in this lesson, we don't have a lot of time to take an exhaustive look at this. I got to thinking I could literally spend 4 or 5 lessons on this, and maybe we might revisit this down the road. And I want to stress as well that tonight's lesson has nothing to do with politics. I have personally and purposely left that out because I want us to examine the biblical worldview of this without any of that. And again, what we're looking at tonight is things from that perspective, the biblical worldview. It is alarming to me to see how many Christians are getting swept up in basically what is a godless movement. And it is our aim tonight to look at some biblical truths on the matter that hopefully will reorient our focus back to the truth that God is in control, and that fact alone should put our minds at ease. So, 3 main points we're going to make tonight, and then the lesson will be yours. We're going to first talk about how we lived on a cursed planet. We're then going to speak of how we have to be good stewards of the planet, and then we'll wrap up with the end of time and what's going to happen to the planet when that comes around. So let's talk first about living on a cursed planet. And I think I chose this point first because I think it's important to go way back to the beginning here and look at what happened in the garden after the sin of Adam and Eve. And so everything that we experience while living on this planet is inside of a curse. And it all leads back to the consequences of the first sin. Sin brings consequences, and it wasn't just for Adam and Eve and Satan, but the earth itself was cursed. Here's Genesis 3:17. The ground is cursed because of you. The ground is cursed. The earth is cursed. And Adam and Eve were told, you will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. And so first and foremost, what I want you to see is the planet, the creation that is spoken of in Genesis 1:31 as being very good, here at some point later is cursed by God Himself. It was God Himself that corrupted the planet. And notice here at the bottom of the verse, it is from this reality that we have had to learn how to survive in a world that is far different than what was created. Notice from the verse, we've had to learn how to grow food. We've had to learn how to work and labor and toil, and that is our life until it ends. And so the curse brings along with it all sorts of things that never happened before sin. And one of those consequences has to do with the weather. The prevalence of strong storms and rising and falling temperatures is nothing new. Seasonal fluctuations come and go. Paul spoke of it in this way. In Romans chapter 8, he says that the creation was subjected to futility. Not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it. Just stop there. Who subjected the creation to futility? God, from the curse in Genesis 3:17. This is done in the hope that the creation itself will also be set free from bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. Listen, the creation is groaning not because of what we have done to it, but because of what God has done to the earth. And as long as the earth remains, it will be under a curse. So we have to understand first and foremost that we live on a cursed planet. That is the reality. And another important point with regard to our biblical worldview on climate change is we need to understand that the earth exists for us. The earth has been created for us. God created it, and it is His responsibility to preserve it. The Lord owns the earth. Here's Exodus chapter 9. This is Moses speaking to Pharaoh during the time of the plagues against Egypt. And he says, listen, as you read that verse, who has control over the weather? God. God has power over thunder and lightning and hail. Why? Notice the last part of the verse. Who owns the earth? The earth belongs to the Lord. So again, Moses here speaking to Pharaoh. God is in charge of the weather. God owns the earth. And since it is His, He has the responsibility to preserve it. Let's go to the New Testament and let's look at another passage. This is Colossians chapter 1. And I want you to see verse 16 and 17. Paul here is talking about the preeminence of Jesus and His role in creation. Everything was created by Him, in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether the thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. Listen to the next verse. He is before all things, and by Him all things hold together. Who is in control? Jesus. He is over everything that has been created. He's in charge. It rests in His hands. And so again, we need to understand that it is the responsibility of God to preserve the planet. Our responsibility is to exercise good stewardship by using what God has provided for our benefit. Think about in this regard. God has given us trees and water and air and fossil fuels and electricity and natural gas and precious metals and elements in the earth so that we can use them to flourish and enjoy. God gave us all of those things. They are inherently good. Even oil is good. It's been given for our good. Let's go back to Genesis for a moment because I think it's important for us to understand the responsibility we have as the creation. We have been called by God to subdue the earth. Here is Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28. We're going to focus on the wording right there in the middle of the verse. God tells, at this point, Adam and Eve, but the command is to all humans. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. So let's focus for a moment. You could just circle that word subdue there in verse 28, because that word means to bring the earth completely under our control for our good. And so this verse right here, the word subdue, implies that we have been given the freedom to extract the resources and develop the capabilities that God has left on the planet. I want you to hear me. We are not an intruder into the creation. We are not an intruder into the creation. That is really the subtle hint, and actually it's not so subtle anymore, behind the environmentalist call. We are the problem. We are the ones, they say, that are creating all these issues and going to bring the planet to extinction. I mean, that's what you saw in the video that I played at the top of the lesson. We're the problem, is what we're told. We're the ones that are creating. And listen, that is the exact opposite of the truth. We are not an intruder into the creation. Again, the idea that's being presented, what our children are being told, is that the earth would be better off without us. And yet the biblical worldview presents a totally different picture. Let's go back to Genesis. Let's look at verse 26. This is Genesis 1:26. Man is to rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. Verse 27, God created man in His own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female. So God has given us everything in and on the earth for our enjoyment. Verse 29, he continues, I've given you every seed-bearing plant on the surface of the entire earth, and every tree whose fruit contains seed. This will be food for you, for all the wildlife of the earth, for every bird of the sky, for every creature that crawls on the earth, everything having the breath of life in it, I have given every green plant for food. So, I want you to take away from these verses that everything that's been created on the planet has been given to us as a gift for our good. And shall I also suggest to you that the resources that God has left on the planet are renewable. So again, think back to the video we watched at the top of the lesson. 50% of the world's trees have been taken out in the last 100 years, that person says. It's not true. There are more trees on the planet right now than there ever have been in the recorded history of man. I have a book over my office, and it was written probably 15 to 17 years ago. There were some photographers that lived out in the Black Hills, and they got the Custer expedition photos, and they went all over the Black Hills and stood in the exact same spot where the Custer expedition people in 1876 took pictures of the area, like of Deadwood and other places in the Black Hills. And what you notice in every one of those pictures is in 1876, there were hardly any trees in the Black Hills. And what they did is they had the picture of 1876 on the left side of the page, and on the right side of the page, they had the same picture in 2005 or 6, whenever it was. And it's amazing, the number of trees. Absolutely crazy. In fact, it got so bad out there a few years ago, they had massive forest fires because the forest wasn't taken care of, and then a bug problem. We have more trees. The resources that God gives are renewable. Think about this. This is Job 28. I'm not going to turn to it on the screen, but if you look at the first 13 verses of Job 28, Job, who lives before the flood, it is thought, says and writes about mining going on, where mountains were turned over and ripped apart, and he speaks of dams stopping up rivers. Sounds like to me there was all sorts of land degradation and deforestation going on before the flood. Let me ask you, have you ever seen any remnants of that? Any evidence of that? Are the resources God gives renewable? Absolutely. Listen, I want you to think about it from this perspective. We need to be thankful that God has given us the ability to subdue the earth. Our planet is amazing. I have been to some amazing places that shout out the glory of God. I've been to some places in the Canadian Rockies and up in Alaska that really probably don't look that much different than they did 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. I hiked back in several years ago up by Jasper, Alberta into the Canadian Rockies, and guys, I saw this glacier lake and area back in there that just was absolutely incredible. But it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I was by myself, without a weapon, without bear bells, without anything. I was dumb. And I had like 6 or 7 miles to walk back to my truck, because it suddenly dawned on me as I'm standing there around this pristine glacier-fed lake that I am not the highest thing on the food chain. And I am probably a dainty morsel for a little or a big grizzly bear coming around. So I got out of there because I realized staying there could be harmful to my health. That part of the Canadian Rockies had yet and has yet to be subdued. I love the desert. I love being out in Arizona, around Yuma and that part of the world, especially in January and February. It is so beautiful. But I have also been there enough to realize that staying there without water and shelter is not advisable. We have not subdued the desert. And I've also been in the jungles of South America, in some pretty backwoods places, pretty unsubdued and deadly. You see, the more unsubdued a place is, the more deadly it is. And so this idea that we're just going to have to go back and let the planet go, that actually doesn't preserve life. It actually harms life. And so we need to be appreciative of the fact that we live in a subdued part of the world where the earth has been developed. I can lay down tonight and not have to worry about scorpions crawling through my bed, or stepping out in the morning to a snake, or like some of our Colombian brothers do, wake up in the morning and step out in the flood water. I like the earth being subdued. I like air conditioning and heat. So these are good things. We need to be thankful we have them. Now, this is important. While we go through all of this tonight, I think it is very essential for us to understand that good stewards do not abuse the planet. There are biblical principles that teach us that we have a responsibility to manage with wisdom the resources God has given us. So let's go to Psalm 8, and let's look together at verse 5. The psalmist here is talking about man. And notice how we are the crowning achievement of His creation. We are of value. We are important. We have been crowned with glory and honor. Go back to Genesis 1:27. You and I have been created in the image of God. And with that crowning, with that glory, with that honor that we have received responsibilities. We are the ruler over the works of His hands. And God has placed this creation under us. We rule it, we subdue it, we take it and use it. And then He goes into detail. We've been given command over the sheep and the oxen and the animals in the wild and the birds of the sky and the fish of the sea that pass through the currents of the seas. Lord, our Lord, magnificent is your name throughout the earth. So showing respect for the creation demonstrates respect for God, who is the giver, and ourselves. It was not until about 10 years ago that I had the opportunity to really spend more than just passing through on the interstate areas up in northeastern Ohio. In fact, before 2007, I'd never been east of Indianapolis on I-70. And so the last 15 years or so have been an awakening into this beautiful state they call Ohio. It is the beautiful land. In northeastern Ohio, I've found to be exceptionally beautiful, in my opinion. I've been up there several times and driven through Cuyahoga National Park and seen that river. And I have seen the video of 1968 or 9 when the Cuyahoga was on fire. That's awful. And it is good that over the last 40 or 50 years in this country, there has been an awakening to the pollution and problems that earlier generations left behind, and we've done a very good job in cleaning most of that up. But I'll tell you, as a young boy growing up in the South, all I ever heard about Ohio was it was a super waste fund site full of toxicity and concrete and rotten, rusting industrial complexes. That's all I ever thought, and especially Cleveland and all that area up there, even Cincinnati. It's not that way because we care. We've done the right thing. We have been good stewards over the planet. This country especially has been amazing in what we've been able to do over the last few generations of being good stewards of taking care of the planet. That's great, and we're not tonight disparaging any of that. You see, the principle that is established in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15 still applies. We still have the responsibility to work and watch over the creation. So, this brings us to our last point tonight. And really gets down to what we want to accomplish by this lesson tonight. We talk about the anxiety and the planet's going to end by global warming and people are being debilitated by that. I think it's important to remember that the Bible says God will bring the earth to an end, not us. So, the earth and every physical thing, everything that has been created will be brought to an end. The earth and the universe is not eternal. And I want you to highlight a verse in 2 Peter chapter 3. Here's verse 7. By His word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and for the destruction of ungodly people. So, highlight that word there in verse 7, that focus on the word reserved. The earth and the universe has a date circled. Only God knows what date that is, but there's been a date circled for destruction. That's been stamped out. It's going to be decreed by God when the time is appropriate. Only God knows when it's going to be. And a little bit later here in this same text, Peter says that the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness? Let's go back to verse 10. And let's focus on the first part of verse 10, the day of the Lord. That term is used 20 plus times in the Bible, Old Testament and New, and it is often speaking of a day of judgment. Ultimately here, it is the day of judgment, the end of human history. And this day of the Lord that's mentioned here in 2 Peter 3:10 is ultimately the day of judgment for the ungodly. And what Peter is telling us here is that human history is going to end with fire and judgment. Listen, if you think we're messing with the earth now, just wait till you see how Jesus messes it up at the end. Here's what I want you to understand. We are not in control. We are not in control. We do not get to choose how the earth will be destroyed. We don't get to do that. It's not up to us. We've had a lot of talk this year about World War III. In fact, Dan coming back in a week or two is going to be talking about World War III. And I've seen more articles this year about nuclear war and what to do in case the bomb goes off than I ever have in my whole life. So it's between World War III and climate change, I guess. For a lot of the people in the world, they are scared to death. And I think I just want to stress this. We are not as big as we think we are. Or not. God is in control. And right now, His Son Jesus is reigning. Look at Colossians 1. Jesus is before all things, and by Him all things hold together. You can rest in that fact. We are not going to destroy the world by global warming, and we are not going to destroy the world by a nuclear blast or any other man-made concoction that we dream up. Now, there may be lots of suffering and debilitating things that come along because we live in a cursed planet, but the bottom line is the ultimate destruction of the planet will be up to God. Now, there is obviously more that I could say tonight. But time is not going to allow. In fact, as I said at the beginning, there's probably another sermon or two that I could deliver and address some of the problems with the scientific consensus of our time and other things where people are skeptical of that consensus. That's a whole other sermon. And then there's probably another sermon on the moral and political and social implications of the current environmentalist movement that has taken over the rest of the world. So tonight, I've wanted to cover the basic biblical worldview that should really direct our hearts and minds. Remember, the planet you live on is cursed. It has been since Adam and Eve were told to leave the garden. We need to remember that the earth has been created for us, and that we should be good stewards of the gift we've received, but ultimately we need to remember that God is in control and will determine when the end will be. And until that comes, we need to remember this passage. This is a promise from God to Noah post-flood. And he tells Noah, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night will not cease. What does that tell you? As long as God determines for the earth to remain, the patterns and the systems of the earth, the weather patterns, will continue on in the way that God wishes for them to exist. This will continue. Please let this passage in Genesis 8:22 bring you peace. Let it fill your heart with confidence that we live in a place that is taken care of by God and held into His hands. All things are held together by Him. He loves us, He is protecting us, and He wants our hearts. All that we've talked about tonight should really just melt your heart. You know? We serve an amazing God. You know, back there at the garden, instead of pronouncing a curse, He could have just said, I'm done, and wiped out human creation altogether right there. But He didn't. He is a God that desires relationship, and He wants us with Him. And everything is about getting home to be with Him in a place other than this planet. We've had people over at our house lately. And when we do, Becky goes out to the store and buys red Solo cups. And when we get done with the gathering, there's a bunch left over. And then I just drink out of them. I have them there in the kitchen, and I just get them out. And sometimes I just don't like throwing those things away, and I will put them in the sink. And then I get in trouble. Why are you putting that in the sink? Just throw it away. I don't want to waste time washing that thing. It's just disposable. That's kind of like the earth. We got a lot of people wasting a lot of time, effort, worry, anxiety on something that just in the end is going to burn up. Why don't we put our hope in the eternal? That is what matters. If you're outside of Christ tonight, we want to extend an invitation to you. Everything is ready. We've had a lot of people come to Christ this year at Cornerstone, and what a blessing that is. Just one earlier today. And maybe you're sitting here tonight thinking about your own life, your own self, and where you fit in all of this. And I want you to know that God wants to take you home to be with Him forever in eternity in heaven. And if there's any doubt in your mind tonight that You may not get there. We want you to think about your soul and take advantage of this opportunity to get right with Him. If that means becoming a Christian, all things are ready. We can help you with that. If you're already a Christian, maybe your priorities haven't been right, this is a chance for you to get your life right. If you're subject in any way, why don't you come forward as Jim leads us in our song of invitation.